welcome to the program, and we'll have that story a little later. Having diffused the mining tax debate after a compromise settlement last week, the Prime Minister Julia Gillard is now moving to be seen to diffuse anxiety in some Labor electorates by toughening the government's stance on asylum seekers in the lead up to the election. The Federal Cabinet has spent much of today on the issue in a bid to outflank the opposition in key marginal seats, particularly in Western Sydney and Queensland. Proposals on the table are believed to include restricting welfare payments to refugees once they've been processed and finding ways also to encourage them to move to regional areas where there are shortages of unskilled labour. Political editor Heather Hewitt reports.
Julia Gillard is clearing the decks, trying to sort out all those messy issues hurting Labor before calling an election. Top on the agenda this week is how to toughen Labor's policy on asylum seekers to try to salvage marginal seats in the outer suburbs of many capital cities.
I think on a debate like asylum seekers, people should feel free to say what they feel. And for people to say they're anxious about border security doesn't make them intolerant. It certainly doesn't make them a racist. It means that they're expressing a genuine view that they're anxious about border security.
The shift in rhetoric was on show at the weekend in the lead up to today's Cabinet meeting. Julia Gillard was in effect legitimising a debate Labor has been tiptoeing around for months.
It's very important that we put all the facts on the table and have a proper discussion in this country, which is sorely needed, rather than imputing racist or prejudicial motives to anyone. It's also extremely important that politicians and leaders in this country don't pander to prejudice.
I think we have been having a discussion about this. Australians have been speaking up about this now for the last 2 years in particular, and they've had a government who's refused to listen.
The fact is, concerns about asylum seekers and boat arrivals were damaging Labor in the western suburbs of Sydney and in Queensland especially, well before Kevin Rudd was ousted and well before the opposition upped the ante last month by announcing a return to temporary protection visas and the so-called Pacific solution. The government was on the back foot.
You've got to go to their record, and their record is 143 boats, more than 4,000 people in detention, including 508 children, and counting.
But at the current rate of arrivals, it would take about 20 years to fill the MCG with boat people. Anyone in the community who could be troubled about that slow arrival rate has obviously got rocks in their head.
For several weeks, Labor members had been raising their fears in caucus meetings about asylum seekers becoming a key election issue. None more so than Western Sydney's federal member for Penrith, David Bradbury, who issued a statement today slamming Julian Burnside for suggesting redneck voters in marginal seats were driving the debate. He was unavailable for a television interview, as were many others like him in marginal seats. But there's no doubt they want something done, and fast.
The real challenge here is to show leadership and to take policies on refugees in this country beyond the old chest beating, beyond the politics of who's softer or tougher on asylum, and come up with a policy which properly responds to the needs of those who are coming here.
They might change their language. The Prime Minister might want to go out there and say she understands their concerns, but she's not going to change any policies or implement any policies, more importantly, that are actually going to address those concerns.
Just watch her. Understood to be under Cabinet consideration today were proposals to restrict welfare payments for refugees once they're processed and issuing limited work permits for refugees to go to regional areas where there are shortages of unskilled workers. This might also address community concerns that refugees are adding to the pressure of overburdened infrastructures in capital cities. The aim is to outflank the opposition without going too far and alienating more progressive Labor voters. It's a political tightrope the opposition is all too aware of.
The Coalition has had a consistent and strong position on this issue for a very long time. We have always raised this issue in season and out because it's something we feel very strongly about and it's something the Australian people know we have a proven track record on. It is the government that is playing politics here a faux midnight conversion on the eve of an election, and they expect the Australian people to be hoodwinked by this.
When the government last toughened its stance on asylum seekers, it announced the suspension of processing Sri Lankan and Afghan asylum seekers. The deadline it set runs out shortly, but the government feels it's off the hook in one sense, because later this week the UN High Commissioner for Refugees will release a report declaring it's now safe for Sri Lankans in fear of persecution to return to their own villages. How Afghan refugees will be treated from here on in remains unclear. Any policy change in this area always carries some risk.
Well, today we are releasing a poll that shows over 70% of GetUp members would be less likely to vote for the ALP and Julia Gillard if she is to announce a policy that would see Australia receive less asylum seeker applications or receive less refugees.
A survey of 1,500 members of the grassroots community advocacy group GetUp points to this dilemma for Labor. While a tougher policy and rhetoric may work in the western suburbs of Sydney, it could well have the reverse effect in inner city seats. Take the seat of Melbourne, where voters have been flocking to the Greens in part because of Labor's more hardline stance on asylum seekers recently. Ministers like Anthony Albanese and Tanya Plibersek in Sydney also stand to be hurt.
We'll be actively campaigning in marginal seats across the country in these coming weeks and months before the federal election. We're raising the issues of refugees and asylum seekers because we believe there should be a genuine debate about the fact that we should, in fact, accept refugees who come to our shores where they are genuine.
The bottom line here is what Labor stands to gain most by announcing a tougher policy sometime this week. The prevailing view is that more seats would be lost in the outer suburbs than in trendier inner city electorates if the government fails to act. In this election climate, that's sure to be a persuasive argument in the Cabinet room. As to election timing, one indicator that it's not too far off is that several Labor members have taken rec leave this week to gear up for an election they anticipate will be held in late August.
Political editor Heather Ewart.